Yo, everybody. Welcome to Off Panel, a weekly interview podcast about all things comics. I'm your host, David Harper, and this week's guest is the co-publisher of the brand new comic publisher, TKO Studios, as well as the writer of two of their initial launch titles, The Seven Deadly Sins and The Fearsome Dr. Fang. And finally, a writer and supervising producer on Gotham over on Fox. It's Tze Chun. Thanks for coming on, Z.
Thank you for having me.
So, we're going to get into TKO here in a bit, but naturally, when a new publisher comes into the industry where people don't really know the players involved, you kind of want to know where they come from. And you're known for film and TV writing and directing. I mean, you actually directed a movie with Bryan Cranston in it, which is a bigger name than we're used to in comics. But so I'm more curious about like your comics background. Like, what were you a big comics reader growing up? What's your comic book origin story?
Yeah, so origin story. Wow, I've never been asked it in that way. It's such an honor to tell my origin story.
It's so dramatic.
I always wanted to be a comic book writer and an artist. I started getting interested in it when I was like 8 or 9 years old, and all through middle school, I grew up outside of Boston, so 3-4 times a week, my mom would drop me off at either New England Comics or Million Year Picnic or Newberry Comics or Barnes and Nobles, and I would just read through, everything. It was during that time that it was like, I'm a Chinese American guy, who was born in the U.S. Honestly, I think it was seeing guys like Jim Lee and Whilce Portacio and other Asian faces who were telling stories. I was like, this is kind of amazing. It wasn't something I'd seen in other mediums. And so comics really were my first love. They were the way that I learned to tell stories. They were the way that I learned to tell stories visually. Starting in high school, I started getting interested in independent film. And I remember this moment really clearly when I was like 16, 17, where I said to myself, man, you get to pick one of these like two really hard things to do with your life because you can't pick both. And at the time I picked independent film, and, I liked the idea of hustling, doing independent film, shooting something and being able to see it play out on screen. But I never really lost that love of comic books, and it was always something I wanted to get back into. I moved out to LA in 2012 to do more television work and, staffing on TV shows, which was a great experience. I worked on Once Upon a Time, which was a really fun show to work on. But at the same time, I went from being a big part of something small, like a small independent film, to being a small part of something big. And I kind of wanted to do something for myself again. And I started thinking a lot about comic books. There's a comic book store right by Once Upon a Time called House of Secrets, which is a great local comic book store. And found myself walking there every day and then looking at the comics and thinking like, God, why did I give this up? And then at that time, now it's getting a little personal, but at that time, the guy that I co-wrote all my episodes with on Once Upon a Time, he was 50 and he really young, passed of cancer. And, I just thought to myself, well, I can't really wait. I can't say that I'm going to do this, a year or two from now, or when this job ends. I have to figure out a way to do that. And at the time, it was really fortuitous. I reconnected with this like friend and mentor, Salvatore Simeone, who is one of my he comes from software, really has this incredible business mind, and he always loved comic books. And we just started talking, and I was like, well, maybe there's an opportunity to do something here, with his kind of business mind and my creative background. Maybe there's a way to start a new kind of comic book company. And that's how we got started.
That's awesome. I do want to touch on the film school thing a little bit, or like your film background. Do you know that Jeff Lemire actually went to film school?
I did.
Yeah.
I did. It was one of the first things we talked about. He was really interesting about it. He was like, he felt, he has such a visual mind. I feel like he could work literally doing any type of storytelling, but he was saying that he felt that it's such when you're on a film set, there's so many people, and he was a little bit more private at that time in his life, it seemed like, but it was I actually ended up not going to film school. I just did I did undergrad film studies.
Oh, okay.
just started making movies.
It is interesting though, because it's like, I don't know, he kind of almost had like a flip side of what you did, where it's like he did a little bit in film from what I understand, but then when, he fully embraced comics and everything. But I'm kind of curious for you as a storyteller, now that you're moving into comics, like how much of that, how much of what you learned as a storyteller on feature and short films, although they're different formats or different mediums completely, like how does that affect the way that you look at comics in terms of storytelling?
I mean, there's obviously things in comics that you can't do in movies and TV shows, and vice versa. And to be honest, the main thing that I felt when I was writing these two stories for TKO was I was just so grateful that when you saw the artwork, it was the artwork that other people would see.
Hmm.
Sometimes when you write a script, you're like, you have an idea of what it's like in your mind, and then when it comes out, it's completely different than the way you thought it was going to be. And there was something so pure about that communication where you're not writing a script for a dozen department heads. You're writing a script for one person. You're writing a script for the artist, and then when the artist translates that script, you can look at it and say, wow, the thing I'm looking at right now, in a few months, this is exactly what the reader is going to look at. And so it was it was an interesting experience. And honestly, Sebastian was very, very helpful. I had never written a comic book script before, and he really was helpful in terms of, educating me about like what works and what doesn't in comics. Because I
Hmm.
had always done it, I'd always looked at it from a reader, but never as a creator.
Yeah. So for listeners that don't know, he's talking about Sebastian Gerner, who is the TKO editor in chief. I do actually want to ask about your core team. So it sounds like you and Salvatore came up with this idea of wanting to do your own thing with comics. How quickly did that core team, which includes Sebastian Gerner, Kara McKinney on creator outreach, Robert Terlizzi as your director of design, and beyond, like how quickly did that team come together in like helping you start cultivating this vision of TKO?
So very early on, it was just me, Sal, and Kara, who was, Kara is this Emmy-winning producer. She comes from she's produced a lot of design, motion graphics. She won an Emmy for um, producing the main titles for Mad Men.
Hmm.
So she came from that in the agency world. And it was, the first meeting, it was a lot of Sal and I talking to each other. And the first meeting, it was Kara on the kind of creator outreach. And then we very quickly brought on Sebastian as our kind of editor in chief type role. We knew that we needed somebody who was really like the hardcore comic book person, because I came from film and television, Kara came from producing and the agency world, and Sal came from the um, software startup world.
Hmm.
So once we had those four kind of core components, like we started pursuing people pretty hard, in terms of the creators that we wanted to work with.
When did one of the things I think was the most notable about your publisher coming together is it was like you didn't exist, and then the next day you had four books launched, and so
Yeah,
that's a 0 to 60 comics are not exactly used to.
yeah.
How long was
Well,
this in the process before you guys spontaneously erupted into the comic book world?
it was about 2 years.
Okay.
So, and so just to go back a little bit, the decision to kind of binge release our books and drop, 24 single issues and four trades, right off the bat was, you know, we always say that we want to be the first modern comic book company, and to do that, we needed to do things a little differently. We wanted to shake things up. We wanted to do something where we were going to binge release our books. We were going to release in multiple formats and also give away the first issue for free digitally. And, a lot of that came from three core questions we asked ourselves basically at every step of planning out what we wanted this company to be. And that was basically, is this good for the fans? Is this good for our creators? And is this good for comics? And every decision we made were kind of based on those things. Now, having lived through the image revolution in the early 90s, where I couldn't wait for Youngblood and Wildcats and all these books to come out. And like, I love those artists. And, we just didn't want to be in a situation where, at the end of that run, there was a lot of lateness with the books, and the company went through a lot of changes. And we just wanted to make sure that as a new comic book publisher in an industry where there are a lot of fly by night and, not because of anyone's fault, just companies that go out of business. We wanted to show that we had staying power, and we also wanted to release our books in a way that we thought would bring in new readership.
Hmm.
And that's kind of why we decided to wait and then, drop all these books on people at the same time. The other component of it is like anyone can say that they're going to do anything, and we just didn't want to announce and say we're going to do this stuff and have people be like, ha ha ha, yeah, sure, they're going to do this in 2 years.
Right. Yeah, I think that, one of the toughest things to do as a new publisher is to prove yourself without having anything for people to really look at. So you like announce yourself, you're this new publisher and you don't really have anything to look at. And you guys kind of instantaneously solved that problem because you could just get on the TKO site and read the first issue right then and then order if you wanted. And that's a really, really huge thing. And I don't know. I mean, I think that's part of the reason why you guys got as much traction as you did right from the start is because until you have those first books out, you're effectively an idea. You're like vaporware effectively.
Yeah.
And it was really interesting seeing that happen. So just to like bring it back to those ideas you're talking about, like the biggest ideas to me is you mentioned binge releasing the comics. You're releasing in 3 different formats simultaneously, which are also oversized comics from what I understand. I don't own them in
That's
print
right.
yet, but I love that. And you're also distributing yourselves, which is
Yep.
really kind of the real atypical one above all.
Yeah.
I've long said that I think that one of the biggest mistakes new publishers do is they just do things the exact same way that everybody else has done them. And I know you had those 3 governing principles, but what made these key decisions along your path and how did they kind of come together?
Well, I think that there is some benefit to coming to things from an outside point of view, you know? And what I found was really interesting was I had kind of a gut instinct about what I thought the company could be in terms of a modern comic book company. And then when I started talking to Sal about it, one thing that he really taught me was everybody in every industry, everyone tells you, the experts in the industry tell you that there's a certain way of doing things that only pertains to that industry. And most of the time, they say that because their jobs depend on it, and also they want to scare you, But there's certain underlying common sense principles that just kind of pervade throughout. It doesn't matter what you're making, if you're making movies, TV, comics, if you're making wingnuts,
It's just
and
the way you do things.
it's just the way you do things. And so a lot of the stuff that we came up with was just common sense, and it was also about leveraging where we had strength. Like Sal is really believes in this company, believes in our work, and so do I. And I think that for a lot of people, you know, we felt that if it was, I mean, actually, this is Sebastian's line, which was basically we started looking at it and saying like, well, if we're going to do some things differently, let's just do everything differently,
Hmm.
And part of it is I'm willing to take risks because what's going on right now is not working in the comic book industry. And so, to me, any different choice that makes sense, even as a hypothesis, a common sense hypothesis, we're going to gather information from it. And listen, the downside is it doesn't work, and we have to change up the way we're thinking about stuff. But the upside is, you know, we get to save this art form that I love.
Right. Well, and the interesting thing is you already kind of know that the other way of doing things wasn't working for new publishers. So what's the
Exactly.
risk?
To me, that's the biggest risk was to do things the way that everyone had done them because we knew that thing didn't work. So literally to do anything else to us felt like it was just a sound logical choice,
Hmm. So this is much earlier than I planned on getting into this, but one of the big players in the overall, ecosystem of comic books is the direct market, the comic book shops and everything like that. And I know that you guys have had a lot of conversations with retailers. I've talked to a lot of retailers about you, and I actually had a question specifically from a retailer about how you're approaching things. And it's
Sure.
does TKO look at comic book stores as important for its future as you build your readership and future catalog, or do you view, your direct distribution model and direct marketing to customers as more efficient and future proof? Like where do comic shops fit in what you're trying to do?
Right. And I think that the main thing is we don't think it has to be one or the other. You know,
Sure.
we want people to be able to buy their I mean, the reason we're binge releasing, the reason we're releasing in multiple formats, the reason why we're doing direct to the customer, but also doing deals with comic book stores is, it goes down to that. It comes down to those initial questions of like, what is good for the fans and what is good for comics. And we just want people to be able to get the books in whatever format and however they like. A lot of people love to go to their local comic book store and browse, hold the books, look through them, feel the weight of the paper. And some people just want to point and click, their mouse and buy something and have it delivered to them in a couple days. So we just wanted to make it as easy for people to have as many options as possible.
Hmm.
In terms of the direct market, in terms of comic book stores, absolutely. We think that this is the bedrock of, who we are as a company, how we're going to reach a lot of our hardcore fans. And I think that there's a way where, I mean, the ideal situation is that we can not only have the comic book stores drive fans to us, but also we would love to drive fans to individual stores. Third Eye Comics, posted a photograph of their books on the shelves, and we retweeted and reposted it on Instagram and just told everybody on our Twitter to go find them. Like it's. I think that there's a way where we can kind of modernize the relationship and try to make it a real two-way street as we try to honestly just all help each other.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, honestly, like, well, first off, I just want to say working with Third Eye is a great start, if only because I love them. Steve Anderson over there is just fantastic. He's been on the podcast before, but I know that one of the prevailing things that kept coming up to me, and I don't know how much you can get into this, but is that retailers were concerned initially about your wholesaler discounts, and from what I understand, that's been an ongoing conversation with shops. Is that something you're trying to do? Because you guys are all new to this, like trying to listen and trying to see what you can do to improve that relationship right from the top?
Absolutely. And again, we really try to be as transparent as possible. So I can kind of tell you the timeline of what happened, which was, um, I put that thread on Twitter at 2 p.m. on a Monday, and we thought, okay, well, let's get people to know who we are, which kind of announced how what made us different and what we were trying to do. We never thought that within 48 hours we'd be contacted by, I mean, 1/10 of the comic book stores in the United States,
Right.
And so when we started to ramp up to doing those deals, I think that we were a little bit conservative. And as soon as we started to hear feedback from the comic book stores, we changed up our deal completely. And I can tell you what our deal is. Our deal is basically it's a 50% discount off of cover price for every single comic book store. There's no tiers. It's just across the board. Whether you buy one copy or you buy 100 copies, it's a 50% discount, and we pay for shipping.
Wow.
We think that's a good deal, and the response from the retailers has been really good. One thing that we have found is that, not everybody is obviously on Twitter, and so it has been some, it's been a lot of letting people know that we are here, that we are not going through Diamond, that we are offering that discount, and that you can order from us at sales@tkopresents.com, and you'll have your order in 2 or 3 days. Everything is available, everything's printed.
Yeah, I actually really love the fact that you're retweeting people who are excited about getting their books in and everything like that. Like people, I saw somebody that had a video where they opened up one of the box sets with like the
It
single
was
issues in
awesome.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean like that's super fun. I mean that's the type of thing that gets people excited about it. But I think you're exactly right. One of the tricky things for like new publishers is how do you get discovered? And like I think comic shops are a huge part of that because if they support you and if they believe in what you're trying to do, you're gonna have no better evangelists in your product than them. And that's huge.
I mean, I didn't learn about comics, sitting by myself somewhere,
Right.
ordering comics and then reading them. Like I learned about them from browsing in my local comic book store. It's something that brought me a lot of joy when I was a kid and continues to. So, it was really important. It was when we heard the feedback about. I mean, when we heard the feedback about our initial offer, I mean, we changed immediately because it was so important to us to do the best possible deal, make sure that we were doing right by the comic book stores, and also, it's we understand how hard it is when you're a comic book store. We understand that there are razor sharp margins, and I think that there's a few things that even within the business model of binge releasing, we really hope to change in that, you know, there's obviously the drop off, right, from the
Hmm.
first issue to the second issue, and then there's a lot of attrition between the first and the fifth issue. And by selling a box set, we hope that a comic book store gets to, they capture a reader from the first issue through to the end of the miniseries, and they can get the whole thing right there. It's a bigger sale, and each time they sell one thing, it's not just one issue; it's the entire series.
Hmm. And now, a word from our sponsor. Yo, everybody. I want to take a quick break to talk about my friends at Radio vs. the Martians. Mike Gillis and Casey Doran host the Radio vs. the Martians podcast, a show that gathers their funniest, smartest friends once a month for a deep dive into science fiction, video games, horror, comics, movies, and everything in between. So far, they've dissected topics like Superman, Steven Spielberg, Akira, George Lucas, zombies, Twin Peaks, Hayao Miyazaki, James Bond, Watchmen, and whether drivers are required to pull over for the Ghostbusters. Find this podcast and its spin-off show, Podcast La Vista, baby, a celebration of the films of thespian and statesman Arnold Schwarzenegger on iTunes, Stitcher, and at radioversusthemartians.com. And now, back to the show. So I want to talk about some of the format stuff, and that's like actually a perfect
Sure.
place because I remember when the day that TKO was announced, naturally everybody on Twitter was talking about it because Comics Internet loves their talk. And I got into a discussion with some folks, like comic pundits, journalists, et cetera, who were very dubious of the idea that you were releasing digital trade and single issues for some reason. And to me, my perspective on this, I've always said that the future of comics is that it's going to be kind of like TV, where everyone kind of engages with the stories in their own way. And some people
Yeah.
love single issues. Why did you decide to do both trades when you're doing binge releases? Do both trades and single issue box sets?
I think the reason was that I personally believe that, again, people like to read their comic books in a bunch of different formats. There are people who have picked up, will buy a trade every month, and have for the last few years, and they've never picked up a single issue. But for me, I'm a hardcore comic book fan. I love the single issues. I have the collector mentality. I love seeing all those single issues together. Um, and very often I'll pick up the trade as well, and I'll honestly, a lot of times I'll pick up the digital and then I'll pick up the deluxe edition.
Oh yeah.
But I think that for us, we wanted to give the books in whatever format people like to read them in. We didn't want to kind of self-select, and I think that, again, it's just fun to experiment. It's like we have the trades. We know that certain people like trades, and we know that certain people like their individual issues. But we also have the theory that there's a lot of people who love the design
Mm-hmm.
and the
Mm-hmm.
feel of single issues, but don't know where to put them because they're not avid enough comic book collectors to have a long box. And even when you do have a long box, sometimes, I like to see the books on the shelf, and so that's why we wanted to create a collector's box where, you have the single issues, they're protected, they get put into a collector's box, and that can go on your shelf next to your other books,
Yeah.
if you don't have a long box. Now, the second thing, which I don't know if this is what you're kind of hinting at, but is the business side of things, releasing both the single issues and the trade at the same time, because there are certainly people who are saying that cannibalizes.
No,
The readership.
well, just really quick,
Okay.
I was actually mostly just talking about like some people genuinely think that those are completely like you don't need one with the other there. And at the same time, I am interested in hearing what you think about the cannibalization because for retailers or for shops, anybody who might actually order them, because I guess theoretically you don't have to be a comic book shop to order from you.
No,
Um,
you could be any type of book. I mean, any type of independent bookstore. We make it super, super easy, and they can have that same discount.
right,
I should clarify: the free shipping is for U.S. stores only.
right.
We will do whatever is the best shipping option for international, but we have to do that on a case by case basis.
Of course, yeah. But I mean, as far as you're talking about cannibalization, like what were you getting into there?
There is a theory that if you buy your single issues, then you'll buy the trade down the line, and that way you're
Mm,
kind of double dipping.
hmm.
But to us, it didn't feel right to say, okay, well, we can sell these twice because we can, and the fans will buy them. And we just said, listen, it went back to what's best for the fans, and what's best for the fans to us was to just consume, the books and enjoy the books in whatever format they wanted to right away, and it was less important to us that we kind of exploit the natural inclination to double dip, and pay for something twice.
Yeah, that ties into your what's good for the readers path.
Yeah.
I do have to say, like, I am definitely guilty of the double dipping, but that has nothing to do with, I don't feel like I'm being pushed to that. But a good example is like I'm looking directly to my right and I see Fury Max, which is by one of your creators, Garth Ennis and Goran Parlov and et cetera, et cetera. All right, I think Jordy Belair did whatever. Anyways, and I bought that in single issues. I have it on hardcover. I've read it on Marvel Unlimited. And one of the nice things is having those multiple options present readers. Sometimes, digital is convenient in a way that single issues or trades even aren't.
Yeah.
And so like giving people all those options from the top is really nice. I did want to ask about how you're making like one of the things I hypothesize, and I could be completely wrong on this, is like one of the things that would make your life easier for all of this is if you're doing some sort of print on demand option. Did you print straight off the top like big print runs for these, or is this something you're
Yes,
kind
we
of
did.
you did? Okay, I wasn't sure
Yeah,
about that.
we did.
Okay,
I mean, we I mean, the print on demand thing, it didn't make financial sense for us, and we also felt confident enough that we could hit these numbers, and all signs point to us having made the right decision.
mm-hmm.
It ends up being more expensive per issue for print on demand, and we wanted a certain quality, and we also wanted to get the books to people very quickly. In the case of ramping up, which thank God we did, because
Right.
yeah, now there's a real demand for the books, and I don't know that we would have been able to keep up if we were doing print on demand.
Yeah, I've seen I think I saw you guys post something of just like palette of like Goodnight Paradise getting ready to be
Yeah,
sent out. I'm like,
yeah,
if print on demand would have been a real drag on hitting that 2 or 3 day
yeah.
time frame. Well, I'm going to get back to business stuff, but I did want to actually talk about some of the books and the creators involved. You have, I mean, I'm curious about how the creator list came together because you have a very interesting mix of big names. Like, I mean, the Sarah team of Garth Ennis, Steve Epting, and Elizabeth Breitweiser are all top of the line in their fields or in their jobs in the comic industry. Like Jeff Lemire and Gabriel Hernandez Walta is just an astonishing team. And then like a personal favorite, I love Unknown Soldier, the Vertigo book that Josh Dysert and Alberto Ponticelli did. So them doing Goodnight Paradise was an immediate selling point for me. How did your creator wish list come together?
Well, we knew early on that it would be impossible to just have people do submissions because, first of all, we're a new company and no one knows who we are.
Right.
So we were really targeted. We went through, and I mean, honestly, I just had my favorite creators. Sebastian had his favorite creators. Sal had his favorite creators. Cara had her favorite creators, and we just kind of put our heads together and we were like, because it's such like lightning in a bottle, right? Where you're looking for the creators, but you're also looking for the right project to do with them. So we just started by having a lot of conversations with people, and it's going to sound crazy, but it was a lot of cold calling people and being like,
Sure.
"Hey, you've never heard of me," and honestly, it's this is what my voice sounds like, and I'm gonna tell you about this new company that we have a dream of a new, like the first modern comic book company.
Mm-hmm.
And honestly, it was hard, but what I didn't realize when I was first starting out was that, and I say this now, like looking back on it, is that everybody in comics, it feels like everybody in comics wants
Right.
something new to happen with comics, but nobody knows what that is. And I believed in this comic book company. I believe in what we're doing, and I believe that it's going to change things in comics for the better. And I think it was just the message of we're going to try something new. Um, and it was a very curated, a very small list that we went out to, and um, that's kind of how it came together.
Mm-hmm.
I wish there was a more interesting story.
No, I mean honestly, the thing that really impressed me when you're with your rollout is you did that. There was a New York Times article that you guys were featured in, and Jeff Lemire talking about how he was excited about what you were trying to do, and that was the reason why he signed in. I mean, signed up. I mean, that's one of the things I think is really interesting is for a new publisher to get big names, typically it's because of existing relationships. Like when Aftershock
Right.
launched, for example, they had Mike Martz is the main guy there, and he knows a ton of people because he used to work at I think Marvel and DC. And you guys, like you said, were cold calling them. What was your pitch? Was it just we're going to try something new, and I hope you guys are excited about trying something different?
Yeah, yeah, it was. It was. It was. The fact that it was Sebastian was helpful. Because Sebastian is known as one of the best. Sebastian Gerner, our editor in chief, is known as one of the best editors in the comic book industry. You
Mhm.
know, but it was also, I think that there was the backing of Sal, who is, a really smart business guy and also a creative guy. And, I had credits not in the comic book world, but, in the film and TV world. And, you know, so another part of it is also that, we match Marvel and DC's rates across the board. Most often we'll beat them. We offer, uh, so just to be completely transparent, our titles are not creator owned; they are work for hire. But at the same time, we build in a lot of protections that they would have if they were creator owned.
Mhm.
I think the back end is, in terms of the actual monetary value attached to it, is bigger than anything that you would get from any other publisher. But at the same time, they're provided for on the front end because just I don't think that you do your best work when you're worried about your rent. I think that you do your best work when you feel like you're being valued by a company, and you are can feel relaxed, and you can also know that your collaborators will also be paid well and will do their best work and have the time to do their best work.
Mhm.
And so that was part of the pitch too.
You
If you
know,
work, yeah, go ahead.
no, I was just gonna say I actually think of your launch titles. This is just my personal pet theory. I think that the biggest thing that you guys had in your first wave is Goodnight Paradise, and the reason why that is because in terms of future creator relations is like what Josh said in that New York Times article is that multiple publishers had passed on it already, and you gave him the opportunity to tell the story he really wanted to tell. And that shows that you're willing to take risks on titles that other publishers aren't. And I think that's going to be you're there's not a lot of publishers that are willing to publish a comic about a homeless man trying to solve a murder, which is Goodnight Paradise. But it's the first issue was great. I really enjoyed it, and they're just fantastic storytellers. What was it about that book in particular that spoke to you and the rest of the team as something you wanted to publish when others were passing on it?
Well, I think that there were a few things. So our mandate, right, is we publish new takes on established genres. That means mystery, sci-fi, fantasy. They kind of have to have genre bones to it, but we really want a new way into it, something that we haven't seen before. So, with Sarah, it was, I'd seen a lot of war stories. I don't think I had seen the point of view of a squad of female Russian snipers. And with Josh's story, you know, there's millions of murder mysteries out there, and I just had never seen this particular point of view about it. But beyond that, Josh and Alberto what an incredible team. Unknown Soldier is such a unique book that stood out at the time that it came out. And our philosophy at TKO is that listen, everybody wants to pigeonhole everybody all the time, and it's like I just I felt that if Josh and Alberta were able to pull off Unknown Soldier, they could pull off anything.
Yeah.
And when he pitched me the story, I saw how personal it was to him, and I was just really drawn to it. I think that I just knew that we could. I mean, the other thing is he was saying that there were other publishers who were kind of interested, but they wanted to do it as a 4-issue miniseries
Sure.
at 22 pages. And we were like, we'll do 6 issues. We'll do a supersized first issue. Every issue will be 24 pages. That's what this story deserves. And I think it would have kind of hurt my feelings. It made me sad to see it put out as a 4-issue miniseries where he wasn't able to explore this thing that he'd been living for,
Right.
living with for such a long time. And we're really proud of the book. One thing I've said to Josh and is you never know what you're going to get. When you start working with a new writer, you don't know what the scripts are going to come in. You don't know what type of work needs to be done. Um, and when Josh sent me that first script for that first issue, I was on lunch break at Gotham, and I was like, I'll read this right now. And I started reading it, and there's a monologue that Eddie gives towards the back half of the book, and I started tearing up
Yeah.
in my office. I had to close the door, pull the shades, and I was like, I cannot believe how affecting this is.
Mm-hmm.
And the crazy thing is that happened every single issue that Josh sent. It started to get, but after the third issue, I was like, all right, I know, I got to go into my office and pull the shades, and I'll read this, and then I'll give notes. But there's just, I thank you for saying that, because I really do, I really feel proud that we put out this book, and I do know that it was not a book that other publishers would have done, and to some degree, when we talked about it internally, we were like, hey, listen, we believe in this story, and the fact that other people won't do it, you know, to some degree means that we should do it.
Well, and it also fits your whole kind of, MO in your approach as a publisher is like you're doing things differently than the way others are. So this is a story that others have passed on, but you believe in it. So of course you're going to have to believe in it in that sort of way. I do have to really quick about Josh, man, that guy, he can create empathy in anyone. He is so
Yeah.
good at really making you feel for somebody. By the end of that, I was like, I would fight anyone for Eddie. I just really, really quick. I have to ask, how much pressure did it put on you that you knew you were going to have 2 of the books in the first wave and you were going to be going up against Garth Ennis and Josh Dysart? Was that any oh my God, what have I done to myself? These are my first comics.
Uh, yeah, but I mean,
I know
yeah,
you're experiencing
no,
your own
I
right.
think, no, I think I'm pretty good at just literally forgetting anything that seems stressful in that way. So
Teach me your ways.
yeah, certainly when we were printing them and I was looking at them, I was like, oh, I hope my words look good. um, but yeah, I think it was tough because it was also I came to this wanting to do this company at first from a writerly standpoint, and then as I got more into it, it was really looking at the business side of things and also wanting to support creators. And you know, at that point I was like, hey, listen, there's worse problems to have than to be in this first wave with Garth and Josh, you
Yeah,
know?
yeah.
Yeah.
It helps that they're really fun books. Like Seven Deadly Sins, I really enjoyed. Fearsome Dr. Fang, I told you before we started recording, the spin at the end, like it kind of twist ish, was a really nice twist, and it's got a really. I compare it to Lobster Johnson, and if you were a Mignola-verse fan, you know that's a very good thing. I do want to talk about some more business stuff before we go.
Sure.
The distribution thing is huge.
Right.
You say what you will about Diamond, but a lot of people say things that they have a complicated relationship with comics. The word
Yeah.
monopoly gets thrown around a lot, and for shops, it can make things tough. On the other hand, retailers are used to ordering through them. Why did you decide to take the risk to distribute the comics yourselves?
I mean, I understand why Diamond exists. I understand why they've grown to the point that they are in the comic book industry and that they're like the only distributor. Um, it kind of goes back to what we had talked about early on, which was what's good for fans, what's good for creators, and what's good for comics.
Mm-hmm.
And as a new publisher, I had just seen too many publishers get relegated to the back of the catalog.
Right.
You work for years putting together these things. The creators work for years putting together these books, and then you're in the back of the catalog, and your ad is the size of a thumbnail. And that was one part of it. And we understand that Marvel and DC play. They're their big ticket. And we get why the Diamond Preview is the structure the way it is. There's no real illusions there. But at the same time, like philosophically, I love this art form, uh, and I don't believe any art form should have a single distributor. I don't think any art form should have a single way for the art to reach its fans and its readership. And the moment where there is a single distributor, uh, there's no incentive to do better. There's no healthy competition, and you know, and I also feel that we wanted to do something differently, and if it doesn't work, fine. But at least we didn't do the thing that stagnated the comic book market.
Yeah.
Comic book readership.
Yeah, I mean, I look at this is they're pure digital, so it's not a totally apt comparison. But I don't know if you're familiar with what Brian K. Vaughan and Marcos Martin did a few years ago.
Oh yeah,
Yeah, the Panel
Panel
Syndicate.
Syndicate,
Yeah,
Private Eye, incredible,
yeah.
incredible book.
I mean, that was granted. Not every creator could do something like that because Brian K. Vaughan and Marcos Martin can just do what they want. They can release a comic at random on this new site through their own publisher and pay what you want, and it would work out for them because who doesn't want to read a comic from Brian K. Vaughan and Marcos Martin? But at the
Yeah,
same time, I think part of the reason why it worked is because they were doing something different, and that brought attention in its own right. And that's, I mean, same premise as yours, even though a different
I
execution.
I love the format. I love that book. I love the fact that he was so transparent about the way that book was put together in that like kind of behind the scenes issue that he put out.
Mm-hmm.
I remember buying that book actually, and you do the pay what you want thing,
Mm-hmm.
paid them the full price, and then in the note I wrote, "You guys are my heroes." So Brian K. Vaughan, Marcos, if you're listening to this, check your email. You're still my heroes.
I remember I think I actually paid like above cover price for a normal comic for the first issue. And then like in the letters columns later on, I think they said something like, you guys don't have to pay so much money for
Uh,
these comics. I don't know. I mean, I think that there's something to be said that if you do something different that people believe in, you're going to get you're going to get evangelists in a way that you wouldn't if you just do things the way that everybody else does it.
yeah, and but the bottom line is it was a business decision from our point, and
Sure.
also a philosophical decision. It's like if we have the infrastructure to distribute it ourselves, then why pay somebody else to do it? And that's part of the reason why we can give such a beneficial deal to comic book shops,
Yeah.
is that we don't have that middleman.
Yeah. I have to. This is my biggest compliment of the podcast. I think the smartest move you guys did was releasing the first issue for free, and to the point where I actually was reading the fearsome Dr. Fang last night, and I showed it to my wife about how impressed I was that you guys had in the PDF of the first issue not only a link to where you can go and buy the rest of the comics or the rest of the issues, but also a link to all of your other books. That worked so well on me. It was unbelievable. But that's also that's a huge risk. I mean, one idea, it's a sample, and like it might sell people, but it also might turn people off. Why did you decide to go with first issue free to try to, as that lure?
Yeah, I think that for us, it was the feeling that we really stand behind our books. We really believe in our books. And we also think that, the creators that we have, the quality. I think when you look at a comic book page of one of our books, my feeling is that the quality is undeniable, and we wanted people to be able to look at the pages in a way that didn't have any barriers. We wanted people to just be able to, and also, listen, we our first issues are oversized. They're all between 28 and 34 pages. We wanted to give people a lot of value in terms of, being able to look at the book and kind of know what the book was about and know what they were signing up for before they bought the trade or the box set. We know that it's a commitment always, when you purchase something new. And, we just wanted to show that we stood behind the books and we were confident about them.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's actually one of the things that I've talked to shops about before, and it's kind of a pet theory of mine, but it's basically that a lot of times first issues are effectively like samples anyways, where some readers read the first issue and then they're like, I'm just going to wait for the trade, or I'm going to wait till the first arc's done. And so you're kind of like you're kind of like with distribution, you're kind of cutting out the middleman and making it really easy for people to do that sampling, which is great.
Yeah. And, from a bigger picture standpoint, I think we are exposed to so much media
Oh yeah.
on any given day. To me, you can't really stand out if you just say, oh, here's one panel
Right.
of a book. It gets lost. You're thinking about the 45 episodes of Netflix that you're going to watch that night. Whereas if you can really show people that, you're starting to tell a story that's really um, planned out, and you have a good sized chunk of, runway to do that, 28, 34 pages. The idea is that you get people immersed enough in that world and those characters that, you don't really want to leave, as opposed to just something that flashes before your eyes, and you forget about it immediately.
That is one of the interesting things, and I kind of like discovered this when I did a retailer survey a few years ago on my site, and one of the things that people forget about in 2019 is that you're almost fighting for people's time more than you're fighting for their money.
Oh
And
yeah, absolutely.
yeah, I mean it's like comic shops. One of the comic shops I had in my survey said that I asked like, "What's your biggest competition for in comics?" Basically, and their answer was Netflix. And it's because you're fighting for people's interest in stories, and it's both very broad and very narrow concerns. But I mean, like it's a truth, it's a fact.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was also, you look at the numbers, between issues number 1 and issue number 6. If in a typical 6 month, God willing, fingers
Right.
crossed, 6 month distribution schedule for, let's say, an arc of a story, a comic book story, and just think about what happens to you over the course of 6 months. Of course that there's attrition. You could be dead in 6 months. like like anything could happen. So it's just wanting to make it as easy for people to read everything right away, stress free, in terms of, like, that once you purchase this and you're sitting down to read it, you're going to read the whole thing, or you at least you own the whole thing, as opposed to you're going to have to remember every month for 6 months to to read another 22 pages or 24 pages.
Hmm. Yeah, no, I think tying into all this, the fact that you guys, binge dropped all these books, like that they're all binge released. I actually wrote an article on my former site, Sketched, about the idea of binge reading comics and how that's going to start changing the game a bit. And you guys really embraced that. But I'm curious. The first four books were all binge released. Is that the plan for all future stories for TKO?
Yes, that's right. So the second wave of books will come out probably late spring, early summer, probably June or July 2019. And those books are well underway. So, it'll be a binge release as well, with similar kind of like box sets, oversized printing, high quality um, paper. And, the response from this first wave has been really good in terms of the way that the books have been released and also the format. So we'd like to just continue that.
Are all of your comics finite stories?
Sorry?
Are they all
Oh,
finite?
finite stories. The idea was always to do something where when we look at our books, we wanted each one of these miniseries to feel like a world, that you were being introduced to. And the idea is that we would love to return to those worlds, if it's the same characters or if it's we want to leave the door open for a second arc, certainly for all these books. And I think that, there's some where it might not be as obvious as others, but we've certainly thought of second arcs and possibilities for all these books.
Sure. So just a few more questions. I had a patron question about you're publishing digitally, but will you ever publish on Comixology? And if no, why?
We'll be on there in like a few days.
Oh, nice. Wow.
Yeah.
So probably by the time this is released.
Right. Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
So next question. You guys, so you've made good comics. We've kind of talked about this already, but you've made good comics. You have an exciting plan, but making that work, like getting these out there, like what's your plan to get these comics in the hands of comic fans? Because really one of and I talked about this, my most recent podcast was with a comic retailer in Chicago, and we were talking about how one of the central issues that publishers don't do but should do if they want to get their comics out there is start marketing the comics to readers. How are you planning on getting these to readers?
So we have a PR company. We're going to do a big PR push this coming month. Um, Essentially, it's this. I came up through the independent film world, and I worked in film and TV for a long time. There's a couple different ways, obviously, to look at what it means, right, to push a book out into the world.
Mm-hmm.
And there's the version of it where, in the comic book world, like you do an announcement in a couple of the online journals, trades, you do a few podcasts, you do a few interviews, and then the book is, either in stores or not. You get a little bit more of a bump when you go to trade. Our philosophy, and this is something, our CEO comes from a sales background. He built a company with, starting with, $70 in his pocket to, one of the top software companies in the world. And the way that you do it is, when you're trying to reach your buyers or your readership or your audiences, you can't think of it as, you're going to do a big push and then we're going to see the runoff of that. It's a battle that you fight every day. It's you try to get new readers every day, but you also try to find new partners every day, and that's part of the philosophy of wanting to do the best possible deals with the comic book shops, but also let them know that it's not just like, oh, we're going to give you the book and then you market it.
Right.
It's like anything that we can do on social to drive customers to your shop anytime we want to. We can, if we're in your city for a convention, we'd love to do a quick video to post on our YouTube channel and on our socials that really tell people about your shop. Like, there's comic book shops are beautiful. It's a way for people to find things and discuss this art form that they love, and we want to partner with people and be their allies as we can. I mean, we don't think of marketing these books as something that we're going to do for the next 3 months and then stop. Like, this is something we're going to do for years, for these particular books and for every subsequent wave.
Yeah, that is one of the interesting things about what you've done is not only does the not having distribution, the typical distribution platform, change things for you both, or from a distribution standpoint, but also from a marketing standpoint, because then you don't have the confines of the 3 month window governing everything you do. And I don't
Yeah,
know, yeah,
yeah.
I mean
No,
that
it's true.
it
You
is. I
know,
mean, like that's one of the interesting things about comics is it's just like there's this window that all comics kind of get promoted within, and if it doesn't happen during that time, it's just kind of done. And that's one of the most disappointing things for me, especially because I come from a marketing background. I don't really see a lot of push outside of like first issue, start of a new arc, trades, etc. And like there's so much opportunity there, and so many people fell in love with these comics not because of number one, but because of number 55 or number
yeah,
274 or something like that. And not saying that we're going to be reading the Fearsome Dr. Fang like issue 360 or something like that in 20 years, but at the same time, I do think that that's a real miss with the way that we do things now. So it's good that you guys are going to be doing a PR push.
I mean, part of it is also, listen, I mean, some of the stores that have contacted us have sold out 2 or 3 times,
Wow.
right? And like, we only launched about, I mean, it's
Three
going to
weeks
be
ago.
today a little bit less than 4 weeks.
Mm,
So these are stores that were able to find out about us, purchase from us, sell out, get their second shipment of books, sell out again, and we filled a third order for them,
yeah.
and that type of responsiveness, it's something that I think should be the norm in the comic book industry, um, but it just isn't right now. And we want to make it something where it's like, yes, if a retailer sells out of our books, they should be able to buy books and get them in the next couple days and then restock, as opposed to having to wait however long.
Mm-hmm. I have to ask. You may not be able to reveal this, but what way are shops leading more towards trades or the box sets so far? Is there a defined
It's
direction so
been
far?
honestly across the board, meaning shops and also individual customers. It's been really split 50-50. And that was actually a really, I mean, first of all, few, right? Because we printed a lot of these.
Right.
But,
Yeah.
you know, um, yeah, I mean, I think it was somewhat, it was gratifying to just see that there actually is a pretty even split in terms of what people were looking for.
I think most people would have expected it to be very heavy on the trade side.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think that I think I think honestly, I think if the box sets looked differently, if they weren't not there, if they weren't as flashy. I've just been seeing a lot of the way that, I mean, as you know, the box sets are oversized and they're very graphic. Jared K. Fletcher designed them,
Oh yeah, he's
amazing
so good.
design. And then if you flip them around, the four combined make a kind of beautiful kind of TKO
Hmm.
tableau. And so we've seen a lot of distributors displaying them in that way. And I think that, you know, in the comic book industry where people really think of the cell as just that individual cover, to have something that does feel like a big, a big, uh, almost like a billboard for the books, I think has been attractive to them, and I think it's eye catching for them.
Oh yeah. I mean, I don't know if you're familiar with this format. It sounds like you probably will be. You sound like a very well versed comic reader, but DC has long. And they don't do it as much anymore, but they had the prestige format comics where they'd have like
Mhm.
the square bound, and
Yeah.
and man, those comics, I swear to God, just the fact that they had, they're gonna have better stock and paper, it's gonna be a really nice production value. There was something about that made me try every single one of those books, and there's like a level of craftsmanship that goes into really taking design into like consideration when you're doing this stuff, like the stuff you're talking about Jared was doing. That goes a long way because it makes your book stand out.
Well, the moment that I knew that we wanted to work with Jared, with Jared was
Paper Girls.
I was standing in the store, and I looked across the store. I was 50 feet away, and
Mm-hmm.
I said, what comic is that?
Yep.
Because I could spot it immediately, and I walked over, and it was Paper Girls. And then every time I was in a comic book store, it always stood. It didn't matter where it was in the store or whose hand it was in, how far away that person was. I was like, there's a level of design and eye catching. Like, this person knows how to attract your eye to a book, and that's why we knew that we wanted to work with him, in terms of our book design and our box design.
Yeah, it's not just design that looks good, but it's design that stands out, which is everything you need out of a comic cover. The smartest decision they made was doing that solid color on each cover, front and back, because like you said,
Yeah,
I've said that a lot of times in the podcast. It's like you go to a comic shop and it just stands out. Another book
yeah.
that's doing that really nicely is Image has a new book from Jen Bartel and Sam Humphries called Blackbird.
Oh
And
yeah,
yeah,
beautiful covers.
they kind of do the same thing with that solid color, and it's really nice. Just two more questions. One's really quick, and it might be painfully simple. What does TKO stand for?
It does not stand for, well, it stands for technical knockout, but we just, yeah, I mean, but we just like the letters,
Oh
you
no, I
know.
like it. I love it. But I
Yeah,
remember thinking, I was like, does this stand for technical knockout, or is it just like
yeah.
TKO flows well?
Well, we wanted something that was three letters where you could put artwork into, and
Sure.
we also knew that this would be kind of a battle, and we wanted to show people that
Ah.
we didn't care. We'll fight.
I like it. I like it. Last question. This is something you brought up in the New York Times interview, and it kind of makes sense with the deals you have, but are adaptations an explicit focus? Is that something you're looking at, or is it really comic first?
Well, there's always the adaptation aspect of the business model. I would be lying if I said that it wasn't. The main thing though is when we first started looking at the books that we wanted to do. Yes, we wanted to make sure that we could do books that were easily adaptable, that wouldn't destroy the underlying concept, meaning that you could actually make great movies and TV shows out of this.
Hmm.
At the same time, we really needed these to be great comic books first and foremost. So that's why we didn't spare any expense in terms of the collaborators that we had. There's a lot of comic book companies that are really only in it for the media rights play, and to us it just seems like a really backwards way of thinking. You don't create a great fan base for a movie and a TV show by making a comic book as quickly as you can and paying people the least amount that you can.
Right.
So we just wanted to make sure that first and foremost we were making great comic books. And right now we're really focused on marketing and selling these comics and getting as many people to really know about these comics. The media side of things it'll obviously come, but we're not really in a rush. We want to do right by the books first, and we don't want to rush into anything. That's my background. So, I mean, I feel like because I know that it's always there and always an option. I'm less inclined to kind of hop on something, whereas the comic book, we just know that we owe it to our creators to really make people aware of these as comic books first and foremost, and then we can handle the movie and TV thing down the road.
Sure. No, it makes sense. Z, that is all I've had for you. Thank you so much. This has been great. I'm really excited about TKO, and best of luck with everything going
Awesome.
forward.
Thank you very much for having me. This has been really, really fun.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Off Panel with comics writer and TKO Studios co-publisher Tze Chun. You can find him on Twitter at the Tze Chun, TKO on Twitter at TKO Presents, and on its website at tkopresents.com. If you're a fan of Off Panel, make sure to check it out on Patreon. If you back the show on there, you not only support it, but you get early access to each week's podcast, access to exclusive written and audio content, and more. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the show on iTunes or Stitcher and give the show a rating or review while you're at it. You can find it on social media by liking it on Facebook at /sketched, that's SKTCHD, following it on Twitter at sketchcomic, or following me at @slicefriedgold. Big thanks to all my existing patrons, including Greg Peterson, Gus, Andrew Scott, Brett A. Schmidt, Jason Goodmanson, Johan Barander, Paul Reinwand, Connor Farner, Vita Ayala, JDC and Matt Gagnon, Aditya Bidikar, Tara Ferguson, Dave Slusher, Kieran Mark Antonio, WMQ Comics, Akil, Greg Lockard, Kokachi, Phil White, Ben Becker, Sean Pinello, Kent Heidelman, Philip Sevi, Al Ewing, Ryan Alcock, Nick Michelin, David Kelly, Robert Wilson IV, Nick Paletto, Dylan Campbell, Owen McCready, Brendan Fletcher, Gary Maloney, Jonathan Nilsson, Matthew Groom, Jason Massey, Adam Bogert, Xavier Files, Maria Schweitzer, Matthew Taylor, Tyler Turner, Nick Patera, Jacob Zarelli, Ford Gilmore, David Baraldi, Evan Blazer, Brian McRae, Ira James Udaskin, Modern Magic Stories, Nick Hall, Bruno Batista, Bobby Angus, Bjorn Basin, John Hendricks, Steve Anderson, Phil Nall, Ian Maxfield, Cliff Chang, Benjamin Chipper, Colin McMahon, Chris Palmer, Maxwell Schmidt, Scott McGovern, Nathan Fairbairn, Kat McKenzie, Lou Iovino, Nicholas Kesslake, Greg Rucka, Adam Highfield, Nicholas Gardner, Andrew Corrigan, Fiona Staples, Chris Morris, Chris O'Halloran, Mark Abnett, Mike Murphy, Michael Shirley, Tom Barnett, Jim DiMonacos, Norbert, Nick Lowe, James Kaplan, and Mission Comics and Art in San Francisco. You guys are all the best. A quick thanks to the band Wolfpack, whose excellent track Outro from their album Volmilch opens the show. Give them a listen as they're totally rad. Thanks for listening, and tune in next week for another episode.